to discuss the role of the media during this COVID pandemic in Australia. Joining us is media trainer extraordinaire Steve Carey. Steve, welcome once again.
Good morning.
We had a chance last week, or a couple of weeks ago now, to talk about some tremendous things that were going on and a number of specialist people who were coping with the challenges that COVID was throwing at them. One of them was the Premier of Victoria, who just couldn't put a foot wrong, and the media, which had a scratchy start and was starting to make some leeway, but they seem to have fallen back and making some mistakes that I never imagined they would.
You mean the media or the politicians?
And the Premier. Well, let's start with the media.
The media, the role of the media. What I want to talk about today, the role of the media in a major event. So pandemic, war, terrorist attack, you go back in time. So my view is the role of the media during a pandemic is to give credible information in a way which we can easily digest, but we don't need the hyperbole, George. We don't need the screaming headlines. We don't need the inflammatory language. This pandemic we already know is terrible and affecting all of us. So what we're after during a major event like this is journalists providing information where we're not panicked, where we can digest it easily and we can make our own opinion. There was a rumour a couple of days ago about, and I got a stack of texts about stage 4 lockdown. Quick, get to the shops, do this, do that. All turned out to be rumour. And I mean, when you look at it, that's where the media and credible sources and trusted knowledge becomes so important.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because on that very evening that some of those texts started flooding the Twitter space, I remember watching a Current Affair, and their opening story was on what would happen and
in a
how
stage
we would
4
need to
lockdown.
behave if we were in a stage 4 lockdown. Now,
Well,
what do you make of that? Responsible or irresponsible?
I don't think that's particularly responsible. What perhaps would have been a better way to go is, are we heading for a stage 4 lockdown and here's why we're not? Or are we heading for a stage 4 lockdown? Here are the signs. Or let's go to the source. Let's go and talk to the government. Let's have an interview at a live cross to Daniel Andrews or a senior minister. So we could have made up our own mind. But what we ended up with was a stack of rumour mongering, innuendo, speculation, none of which turned out to be correct. We may head for stage 4.
Correct.
But let's take our time to understand that if it happened, there would be a grace period. It's not just going to be stage 4, this afternoon it's happened. That's ridiculous, because it doesn't give people enough time to digest that information and the shock and awe of what may be happening in a stage 4. The fact that we're even talking about it now, we have to be careful, because this interview goes out online. Yes. So what we're saying, or what I'm saying, is trust your sources. Trust those information sources. And I've banged on about this every time I've come on. Choose and select a source that you trust. Don't go to necessarily the local blogger who has no connections and may have a vested interest in reporting nonsense. Go to journalists who've actually done the hard yards, from organisations that are trusted, such as ABC, your primary news channels, BBC, Washington Post, or you look at the local quality of reporters we have in politics at the moment. I notice with some sort of humour that Andrew Lund from Channel 9 now tries to pop himself in every now and again in an interview as Lundy. The Premier calls him Lundy, which is quite interesting, but it also shows that familiarity that these guys are there all the time. They're getting the information from the source. Go to the source.
Let's talk about another part of information that's been a bit blurred, and I think there's a great sense of misinformation out there. From day one, the media has banged on about a vaccine. You know, the last time there was a successful vaccine released around the world?
You'll have to tell me.
It was the early 50s. It was Jonas Salk, and it was the vaccine against poliomyelitis. Now, there's an awful lot of us to take in when you think that. There is no vaccine coming in a hurry. And if we were to have a successful vaccine trial and it passed all the tests, it would be at least 2 years before we saw it.
Well, that's why the nonsense of hydroxychloroquine. You know, that's people grasping at straws. That's people who are ill-informed, including the President of the United States, who is perpetuating that sort of theory. What I would say about that is, during a major event, There is nothing wrong with wanting some hope. There's nothing wrong with the media disseminating some hope. Otherwise, it's just a downward spiral of depression. You already hear people saying, I don't want to watch the news, it's too depressing.
Correct.
That's why you have to be careful the way you package news bulletins. It can't be all just crap of here's murder, mayhem, death, destruction. That's why any good news director or good news production team, whether it be a paper, radio or TV or social, has a diet of information. So you get your heavy news, then you get something uplifting. So the vaccine falls into that category of hope. Where it becomes dangerous is that it becomes ill-informed and you give people hope on a short time frame. Nothing wrong with saying we're working on a vaccine, nothing wrong with saying that there are some positive signs, but so long as you are honest enough and credible enough to say that, but the reality is that's a year or 2 years off. So in the meantime, we have to stick with what we're doing, which is isolating.
Yes.
Now, Neil Mitchell has a campaign at the moment on AW, which has done the W. That's starting to get traction. That's a fantastic grassroots kind of campaign.
It's aspiration too.
It's aspiration, yeah, but you know what it is, George? We can all take part of it. We're doing it here, we're talking about it here, so when this goes out, we add to that voice. That's good, a commonality of purpose. And that's where we get this nonsense about partisanship and bipartisanship. So what you want is, you want to have a situation where the media can report things without fear or favour. That's the great cornerstone of good journalism, right? So during the pandemic, perhaps it would have been interesting had the Premier made part of the crisis cabinet, maybe it would have been advised or common sense to have included a couple of the opposition, because that shows us that we have a commonality of purpose.
A unity.
A unity, and it also, but to be a little bit smart there, and you know this, it also means you knock out a lot of the opposition's ability to then have a go at you, to snipe at you from the sides, because you've got then a commonality, a common purpose of people trying to achieve the same thing. Not everybody in Victoria votes Labor, not everybody votes Liberal, not everybody's man, woman or other gender. So you need to have, during a major crisis like this, you need to have, in my view, a group of people who have a common purpose for the common good that we can all get behind.
Which is what we have at federal level. The Prime Minister has called all the premiers together and they meet regularly. Why couldn't we do it at state level? Now, for someone, last time we spoke, you and I were very much in agreement about the performance of the Premier, Dan Andrews, and his performance early on through this COVID emergency was nothing but sublime. What's happened?
Well, what's happened is the wheels have fallen off because we've had a lot of mixed messaging. And the trouble with mixed messaging is that you then lose momentum and then you start to not become as trustworthy as you were. And you're right, a week's a long time in politics. It's a month since we talked. In that month, things have shifted seismically. And for the Premier, he has found himself in between a rock and a hard place. His messaging at the start was very strong. Then we had a period where we were getting a lot of mixed messages and a lot of mixed signals. And that has continued to the point where now his ability to actually get those messages out, do we trust him? And that's why you're seeing a lot of the medical officer, Brett Sutton, at the moment, because he has become, for a lot of people, the go-to person that we trust. And once you break trust, you're in a very hard place because it's very hard to get trust back.
Steve Carey.